Most Australians have no idea this already happened. While the cost of living dominated every headline, while interest rates sat heavy on every mortgage, something quietly rewired the way this country powers itself. Not over a decade, not over 5 years, in 12 months. And the numbers behind it are unlike anything Australia's grid has ever seen before. Here is what changed, why it matters to your hip pocket, and why the people who understand this shift are already positioned ahead of everyone else. Let's start with where Australia was sitting just 2 years ago. The grid was under pressure. Coal plants were closing faster than replacements were being built. Blackout risks were real enough that AEMO, the Australian energy market operator, was issuing formal warnings to state governments. Wholesale electricity prices were spiking to levels that made business owners physically sick when the invoices landed. The system was creaking. Then batteries arrived, not the little backup units sitting in garages, grid-scale batteries, the kind that can power tens of thousands of homes for hours. And in the space of 12 months, Australia went from having a handful of them to running one of the most battery-dense grids on the planet. Here is the scale of what happened. At the start of 2024, Australia had around 1.8 gigawatt hours of grid-scale battery storage connected to the national electricity market. By early 2026, that figure had jumped past 8 gigawatt hours. That is more than a fourfold increase in under 2 years, with the steepest growth curve hitting inside a single 12-month window. No other developed country scaled grid battery storage at that pace during the same period. And the projects driving this are not small. Victoria's Victorian Big Battery near Geelong expanded significantly and became one of the largest lithium-ion storage facilities in the Southern Hemisphere. New South Wales pushed multiple large-scale projects into operation along the transition corridors, connecting renewable zones to population centers. Queensland accelerated its own storage pipeline as the state pushed toward its 70% renewables target ahead of schedule. South Australia, already the grid storage pioneer after the original Hornsdale Power Reserve, proved the concept back in 2017, kept stacking capacity on top of capacity. But here's the piece that actually matters to ordinary Australians. What did all of this do to power prices? The honest answer is complicated, and anyone who tells you otherwise is either selling something or hasn't read the data. Wholesale electricity prices in the national electricity market dropped sharply during peak renewable generation windows. Solar is now so dominant during daylight hours that midday wholesale prices frequently hit zero or go negative. Batteries change the equation on the other side of that. They soaked up the cheap midday solar and pushed it back into the grid during the early evening peak, the 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. window that used to be the most expensive and most vulnerable part of every day on the grid. AEMO data shows that evening peak price spikes dropped in frequency and severity across every major state market during 2025. The kind of price event that used to send wholesale costs to $15,000 per megawatt hour happened far less often. And when you strip out the extreme spikes, the average wholesale price starts to look more manageable. But here is where most people get frustrated. Why haven't retail power bills dropped the same way? Because retail pricing in Australia does not move in real time with wholesale costs. Network charges, metering costs, retailer margins, and green scheme levies all sit between the wholesale market and the number you see on your bill. The grid got cheaper to run at the wholesale level. That saving moved slowly and unevenly through to household bills. Some retailers passed on reductions, others absorbed the margin, and network costs, which make up a big chunk of every bill, barely moved at all. This is the gap that frustrates every energy economist in the country. The generation side is transforming at a speed nobody predicted. The retail and network side is moving like a government department reviewing a form. So what does this actually mean for you right now? If you own a home, this is the moment to pay close attention to your energy plan. Time of use tariffs, where you pay different rates depending on when you use power, are becoming far more common. Households that shift heavy usage like dishwashers, washing machines, and EV charging to off-peak windows are already cutting bills by hundreds of dollars a year. The infrastructure now exists to make that strategy work reliably in a way it never could before batteries smoothed out the evening grid. If you are considering solar, the calculus has shifted. Without battery storage, excess solar exported to the grid now earns you a much smaller feed-in tariff than it did 4 years ago. That midday surplus the grid used to reward you for is now worth less because the grid itself is flooded with it. The value of solar in 2026 is increasingly about using your own generation, not selling it back. Pair it with a home battery and the equation improves significantly. If you are an investor watching the energy sector, the battery supply chain story is still early. Australia has lithium, Australia has the projects, but the processing, the manufacturing, and the downstream value capture still mostly happens offshore. That is a policy conversation that will run for years, and the outcome is not settled yet. Here is the bigger picture. Australia ran an experiment at national scale. It asked whether grid-scale batteries could stabilize a grid moving fast away from coal while renewables scaled up. The answer that came back in 2025 was yes, faster and more decisively than most experts publicly predicted. The grid is not finished transforming, not even close. But the proof of concept phase is over. Batteries work at scale on the Australian grid. The question now is how fast the retail market, the network operators, and government policy catch up to what the technology has already proven. The Australians who will benefit most from this shift are the ones paying attention right now, because the gap between what the grid can do and what your power bill reflects is still wide, and that gap is where the savings are hiding. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what is actually happening to Australia's power grid, do me a favor and hit the like button. And if you are not subscribed yet, now is the time. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. I'll see you there.